What's an oddly violent fact that you know? Bamboo in the right conditions can be used as torture. It can grow 4 centimeters, inches a day, growing right through the captive. There is some controversy about whether anyone did this, but Mythbusters confirmed it was viable. I just always thought it would be the worst way to die. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/bamboo_torture. Genghis Khan's forces killed so many people they lowered the world's carbon levels. Most people think you handle a knife with the pointy end down, but you actually want to hold the pointy end up so when you're stabbing you will get under the rib cage into the vital organs. The number of British soldiers lost to mud alone in the Battle of Passchendaele is thought to be numbered in the thousands. People who say to shoot people in the legs instead of anywhere else don't know what they're talking about. Why? Try a few squirty boys in your legs that will make you bleed out insanely fast if punctured. Suicide bombers can often be identified because the blast pressure of a torso-mounted suicide vest separates the head at the weak point, neck junction. So heads tend to pop off and land nearby relatively intact like a T-ball. The human brain has no pain receptors. A parasite could be eating you from the inside, and you wouldn't know. Bedbugs don't have vaginas. The male stabs the female in the abdomen with a barb-like penile structure and ejaculates inside the open wound. Death by infection, for the female, is a common outcome. Cannibalism may lead to a disease called Kuru, which has no cure. It's a prion disease, and it's always fatal. It's typically acquired after eating the brain. There was an increase of this disease at one point in Papua New Guinea, as there was a practice that involved consuming the brains of deceased relatives performed by the 4 people. I hate that I read every single comment. Time to begin therapy. When Flight 93 crashed, the body parts and personal effects of the passengers were scattered into the nearby woods. Tree climbers had to retrieve as much as they could from the treetops. Injecting insulin under the tongue is the perfect murder way. It can't be traced, and by the time anyone comes, it wouldn't be left to find. If anyone legal is reading this, I swear I am not a murderer, I am just on TikTok. The Dachau concentration camp was located near Munich. While not an extermination camp in the proper sense, it still had a crematorium due to the high number of inmate deaths, and oftentimes ash of the burning bodies would snow on the residents and in the streets of Munich. Officials passed it off as local wildfires and the people believed it. The problem with this is, like, I know a fair amount about violence against human anatomy that I don't even have a good gauge for what's oddly violent anymore. Like, does lots of attempted suicides by gun survive count? People who aim up rather than back have a habit of surviving after they blow their faces off. Sometimes they pass a while later, but sometimes they just survive, except now their upper jaw, nasal passage, eyes are gone. Only 20% of males in the Soviet Union born during the first and second decade of the 20th century survived WW2. The animal with the strongest punch in the world is the mantis shrimp. They have a club appendage that can deliver blows up to 60 miles per hour. Danny DeVito actually waterboarded Caitlin Olsen when they were taping It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The material meant to keep Olsen's face from actually being waterboarded didn't work right, but rather than stop, she just kept the scene going. Oh, and this was a week after a drunk neighbor picked her up and slammed her on the ground, which broke her back. When the Romans were about to lose a battle, they put their sword on the ground, laid up, and belly flopped on it, skewering them. They did this because they would rather submit to death than to the enemy. Finally, a question not about sex. Exposed human intestines, intestinal avulsion, secondary to traumatic evisceration, look like loops of bloody sausages, and freshly amputated limbs secondary to blast trauma can resemble bloody hamburger meat packed around shattered bone with shredded crepe paper hanging around it. Addendum to second fact. When placing a tourniquet on said amputation, sometimes if there's not enough intact tissue left above the site of the injury, the pressure of the tourniquet can just squeeze the pulped flesh out from under the remains of the skin like meat jelly. Source. I'm former combat medic and Iraq war vet. Enjoy the rest of your day. A decapitated human head weighs about as much as a bowling ball. When someone is flayed alive, they often die of hypothermia, blood loss, or shock hours to days after being flayed. Oubliettes were pits at the bottom of the cockles of a dungeon. Prisoners who were condemned to death were tossed to the bottom, oftentimes breaking their legs from the long fall. They were then abandoned in a hole filled with nothing but humans' remains, shit, piss and rats, and ended up either starving or freezing to death. There is a video on YouTube of a camera crew that lowers a camera into a real oubliette. During the Japanese occupation of China, they massacred many, many people. The Japanese wanted to keep a record of how many they'd killed, but they soon realized they didn't have space to keep all the heads, so they cut off the victims' noses. They sent these back to Japan where they built a shrine out of them. As estimated, 30-50,000 were used in the shrine. I believe in the 90s, after decades of campaigning by the Chinese, the Japanese were finally going to apologize for this war crime. However, when the Chinese also demanded the body parts be returned to China, Japan then rescinded the apology. The shrine is still there to this day. Stem to sternum. If you have a knife and someone is attacking you, hold the blade towards them sharp side up. Stab them just above the belt and jerk upwards as hard as you can, then run. It's pretty hard to chase after someone while you're holding your intestines in. Chimpanzees launch raids on rival tribes and kill the males' babies while taking the females for themselves. Dolphins are sexually active. A bit too sexually active though, considering they rape literally anything they can get their hands on, that and penguins. Female ferrets go crazy when in heat. They have to breed or they will die, and the breeding process is very violent to the female, including scratching, biting and hurting the female, but it's necessary for her to keep living. Hanging is an extremely specific science which requires calculations on the weight of the person being hanged, the length of rope used, and even the musculature of the neck. Most people know that though. Most people also know that getting it wrong can mean that instead of having their neck broken, the person will asphyxiate. This is usually caused by not enough weight, not enough of a drop. What most people don't realize is getting it wrong in the other way, i.e. too much weight plus too much of a drop, has historically caused the head to separate entirely. It also was not entirely uncommon for the drop distance to be misjudged, causing the person to impact the floor, often breaking bones. At which point they would have to be hauled back up and hanged again. Edit. Oh, I have more. Previously, it was believed that the touch of an executed person, or even consuming some of their body, would cure ailments. To that end, executioners would often sell the opportunity for people to touch the recently executed. But wait, it gets worse. Allegedly, as this is based on anecdotal evidence in a travel diary, and therefore could well have been good old garden variety anthropological racism rather than actual fact. There were instances in Germany where the sick would gather at the front of the dais where someone was set to be beheaded, and when the head was removed, would crowd around trying to catch blood in containers to drink. Medical cannibalism. It takes 15 pounds to break a collar bone. To get 2,000 daily calories, you could eat nothing but human teeth. A full mouthful set of 32 adult teeth contain about 36 calories. A single tooth takes up, on average, about 0.5 cc. A single serving size of breakfast cereal is about 1 cup. There are, for the sake of easy math, about 500 teeth in 1 cup, which is about the equivalent of the full sets of teeth from about 15.6 humans. A single bowlful of human teeth would be about 560 calories. Which means to hit 2,000 calories a day, you'd need to eat about 3-1/2 bowls of human teeth, approximately the full sets of teeth from 55 adult humans. Every day. Now, consider that unless you're being very selective with these teeth and only eating teeth that are compromised, you face damaging your own teeth when chewing every spoonful of every bowl of human teeth each day. So it would be wise to pulverize these teeth into a powder, and add a liquid to make a sort of slurry you could drink. Bone apple teeth. Human flesh can gum up a chainsaw. Only viable in movies and games. Many people like the internet tip for burying a body, i.e. burying vertically, dead animal over it, etc. But it's way more convenient to burn, melt it, because dental records and bone structure provide crucial information to identification. On that same note, there are numerous children still unidentified from the John Wayne Gacy murders. Boiling peanut butter and magic shave with a bit of water makes prison napalm hard to wipe off, and even if you live, it'll be heavily disfigured. Learned that in another AskReddit. Lynching, translated variously as the slow process, the lingering death, or slow slicing, and also known as death by 1,000 cuts, was a form of torture and execution used in China from roughly 900 CE up until the practice ended around the early 1900s. It was also used in Vietnam and Korea. In this form of execution, a knife was used to methodically remove portions of the body over an extended period of time, eventually resulting in death. Documentary and link. You can crack a skull open easier with a bottle than you can break a bottle over someone's head. Only mildly violent, but if you batter the tire of a parked car properly, you can trip the onboard computer into thinking that it has been in a crash and unlock the doors. Pigs can, and will eat every bit of the human body, except for the ears and teeth. After finding that out, I don't think I will ever go near a pig IRL. The Chinchorro people of Peru and northern Chile, 5000 BCE, had the oldest mummification practice wherein they'd remove all flesh and organs from the deceased and wrap them in clothes. Since they're buried in the Atacama Desert, driest desert on Earth, they're well preserved. Until now, BC climate change is slightly humidifying the desert caused bone rot and mold. If you have a tooth knocked fully out, root and all, it can go back and live on like nothing ever happened if you get it back into the socket within 45 minutes. After that, the ligament that attaches the tooth to the jaw dies, and while you can put tooth back in, and it will stay there, your body will recognize it as foreign material and resorb it over time. Pro tip 1. Don't put the tooth on ice. Instead, put it in a cup of milk or carry it in your cheek. Pro tip 2. Don't go to the hospital. A knocked out tooth isn't an emergency and you will wait much longer than 45 minutes to be looked at. Go to the closest dentist. It will be their biggest emergency of the year, possibly of all time. Headlocks are surprisingly easy to put people in and can be much more brutal for the victim than it seems. I like to post this when I get the chance in threads like this. Male llamas and alpacas have some very sharp lower incisors, sometimes called fighting teeth. Why are they called fighting teeth? When fighting for dominance of a herd, which is a savage display in and of itself, a male will use those teeth to castrate other males, ensuring they can't mate with the females of the herd. Farmers and breeders will file these teeth down, usually during shearing. The Paraguayan War, by some estimates, killed over half the population and 80% of all military-aged males in Paraguay. Bears will give oral sex. Google Unit 731. It's actually disturbing the experiments they did on other humans. Removing organs while still alive and awake took babies 3 days old into blistering cold temperature to freeze to death, put people in pressure chambers until their eyeballs popped out of their skull, injected several test subjects full of horse blood while being drained from their own blood, hung upside down until death. Dehydrated to death in a room of hot fans, spun to death using a centrifuge, exposed to extremely lethal X-ray doses, burned and buried alive, purposeful heroin injection to cause overdosing. There's so much worse. According to the book The Survivors Club, of the most common type of violent injuries, stabbing, shooting, and blunt trauma. Think being hit by a bat or slammed against a wall. Blunt trauma is the hardest to save someone from because there are so many injuries all over the body that it's nearly impossible to stem the bleeding. Stab wounds are the easiest to fix, followed by gunshot wounds. Turtles breathe out of their butts. Olaf. 9/11 happened when I was in college. A guy the first had a class with's girlfriend was a rescue dog handler. She went out to assist in the rescue, and came back with PTSD because the dogs would come out of the ruins covered in human blood. Just covered. That possibility had never occurred to me. Split brain, while not very violent, still terrifying. If you have a catastrophic malfunction in a bolt-action rifle, the bolt will jettison backwards and impale you wherever is immediately behind it. When a pathologist does an autopsy, they need to take out your organs to take samples. First they open your chest and then your abdomen. Once you're open, they snip the aorta and esophagus. Then, while holding onto those, they sort of lift it up and snip down the connections of the spine. Then the last bowel at the bottom is snipped. The organs all hang out together in a big blob, and those just get plopped onto a metal table in a big mess. The pathologist then sorts through your organs and chops up pieces next. After that's all done, they basically just dump all your organs into a bag and just sorta toss that bag into your empty husk. Then they use a big ass thread and needle and sew you back up with that bag of organs inside you. Oh, and while this is all happening, a different person is sawing your skull to get to that sweet, sweet gooey brain. Oh, and one more thing. The first step of the autopsies I saw was to take a needle and suck out the eye juices. They do toxicology testing on that. Our closest genetic relatives in the animal kingdom are chimps and bonobos. Chimpanzees murder and attack other chimps by ripping their face, hands, and genitals off. Bonobo society is based almost exclusively on sex, including everything, even pedophilia and incest. Our genome is 0.01% different than these violent sex monsters. Explains a lot. Female hyenas have a pseudopenis, and they give birth through it, which kills a not insignificant percentage of them. If you drain the iron out of the blood of approximately 2,352 people, you would have enough iron to make a stable iron longsword. Most gunfights are within 7 feet and people still miss most of the shots they take. Edit. Holy 2.9k updates Batman. Thanks for the love, y'all. 1/4 cup of blood can be used in the place of an egg in cooking. They have very similar binding proteins. Execution by electrical chair used to be a relatively costly process because of the preparations needed to provide a prisoner with a humane death. Some of the aforementioned preparations included body cream to prevent severe burns, adult diapers so that the prisoner wouldn't soil everything when they lost control of their sphincters, and shaving cream and a razor blade to get rid of the inmate's hair. Also, The shaven head is needed in order to connect electrodes to the skull without anything that could slow down the electrical current. If a dog lunges to attack and you are able to feed him your weak forearm, you have access with your strong hand to crush his esophagus. He will die. Things you learn in veterinary school. The reason they put a bag type of thing over your head when in an electric chair is so that your eyes won't pop out of your head and drop on the floor. It takes apt 7 to 8 pounds of force to rip off the human ear. You can do it, but pain won't let you. There was a 911 jumper who was still conscious after hitting the pavement. He told a first responder he wasn't dead. It is possible to drive a middle finger through someone's eye socket with sufficient force to penetrate the very thin layer of bone behind the eye and do immense, quite possibly lethal, amounts of brain damage. So this is an actual violent fact. If you get in a fight and punch someone in the mouth, and later realize that his teeth cut your knuckles up, go to the hospital. People have died from the bacterial transfer from tooth to knuckle. Otters are actually horrible, even though they look adorable. A tagged territorial male sea otter held a struggling female underwater until her body became limp and then copulated repeatedly with her carcass. When we have to submit animals for rabies testing, we have to cut their head off, and make sure we get some of the brainstem too, and send it via FedEx, UPS to a lab. Rape and murder of adolescent animals is a frequent thing in the animal kingdom. Cats, for example. Naval combat is some brutal stuff, even if most don't tend to think of it that way. They can be just as horrific as land battles, if not more so. I've read about ships that took serious beatings, in this particular instance Battleship Bismarck, who took so many close-range battleship and cruiser shells during her final battle that her hull was glowing red-hot in places, where the insides are described as just meat, just filled with nondescript mixtures of blood, flesh, organs, and shattered bone, with occasionally identifiable body parts or corpses. Maybe you'll recognize part of a crewmate's face here or there. Read about entire decks slick with blood, dismembered and charred bodies strewn everywhere, skin being scalded off or limbs amputated by the steam from damaged boilers depending on the pressure and size of the hull, people just straight up being vaporized by shell hits. Ships are confined spaces. All that kinetic energy, shrapnel, and fire doesn't disperse into the open air, so you can get some real nasty scenes. Some ships that manage to survive heavy beatings would never be able to have the smell of burning and decaying flesh fully washed out of them. A human arm only supplies about 1,800 calories while a leg has about 7,150 calories. Dogs like squeaky toys because to them it resembles the sound of a prey animal in pain. There is roughly 40 mouthfuls of blood in the human body. Dolphins will force themselves onto a mate in groups if they cannot normally get companionship, and this rape can go on for days. The chainsaw was invented for childbirth. Well, I think how shrikes kill their prey counts as violent. They literally just stab them on tree branches, cactus spines, whatever nearby. They're nicknamed the butcherbird for a reason. Your immune system doesn't know your eyes exist, so if Tit ever found out, it would think your eyes are an outside force and would destroy them. Most of information about the human body handling extreme temperatures and handling pain has come from Nazi concentration camps and Japanese Unit 731. Pencils and all kinds of writing stuff is extremely effective at hurting people. In more ways than one. Edit. OMG, thanks for all the upvotes and John Wick references. That is super lovely. That is building the confidence again to regain trust in society in such dark times for us is really good. Thank you again for welcoming me warmly. 3. Polar bears actively hunt humans. Feeding your baby 1 tablespoon of salt will kill it. Hanging yourself is really a very slow and painful way to die. A professional hangman checks the weight and height of those sent to the gallows beforehand. This is so the drop instantly breaks the neck, without popping the head off too, for a quick, humane execution. People who throw a rope over a ceiling beam and just jump off a chair don't die immediately. That method is long strangulation. Dolphins try to rape people and they wrap seaweed and live eels around their penises and masturbate. You would have to hold a pillow over a person's face for at least 4 minutes before you would actually be able to suffocate them. That's why you should play dead if someone tries to smother you with a pillow. More often than not, they'll think the job's done and you can catch them by surprise. Boiler explosions, like a steam train or ship, may look like quick and painless, but in reality they are slow and painful as you literally get cooked alive by steam. A torture-to-death method used by indigenous Americans was to bind, incise, disembowel and treat immediate blood loss and trauma in order to keep the victim alive while their intestines were strewn about the area. If done in the day, I imagine insects and ravens would have the first go. At night, maybe raccoon and skunk. Either way, Each peck, scratch and tearing bite would be felt. When chimpanzees attack a neighboring group, they will wait for one or two of the members to be off alone where the rest of the group cannot help them and then attack. They're so vicious in those attacks that they will rip the limbs off the enemy and eat them while still alive. Just brutal. A starving pet in a house with your dead body will start with your lips, nose, eyes and ears. Sleep well. Edit. Damn. This got big. Seems we all can agree, much as we love cats, if you sleep in by 15 minutes, they're thinking about it anyways. Also, I am firmly in Camp Dog. But yes, they will do it also, just a little later. Many hits on Google. This is but one. Read at your own discretion. https://slate.com/news-and-politics/2011/07/or-dogs-willing-to-eat the remains of their masters. HTML. You really do see something leave when then die. You can 100% see life leave someone's eyes. And it's fucking terrifying. While human bone is pound per pound stronger than concrete, it takes surprisingly little pressure to break most joints. With a little training, an average 10-year-old could do it. Actual homicidal rage feels very emotionally overwhelming and is a pretty scary thing to think about for the rest of your life after you genuinely experience it. I've experienced it exactly once. I didn't act on it, though I almost did. The only thing that kept me present-minded enough to stop myself was the fact that my little siblings were in the room, so they would have seen me kill that person, and I didn't want them scarred for life, so I managed to pull myself back. It's given me a lot of empathy for certain people because I had never felt so out of control before in my life. I've never struggled that much with my temper or managing my emotions, so for that to feel so difficult to stop was really scary. I've always been the one to make edgy jokes about killing people, but I've never actually wished to seriously harm someone else, let alone kill someone. I hope I never feel that again. As much as I hate some people, to feel that certain rush and urge to hurt someone makes me really sick thinking about it. I kinda hope not too many people can relate to this, honestly. Would worry me a lot if too many do. Lysol was initially promoted as a feminine hygiene product. Earlier formulations of Lysol contained Cresol, a compound that can induce abortions, and it was widely used by women who could not otherwise obtain legal abortions in the United States, although the medical community was relatively unaware of the phenomenon for the first half of the 20th century. By the 1960s, though, published medical literature had acknowledged the common use of Lysol and other soaps to induce abortions, which could lead to fatal renal failure and sepsis. It takes 3 full turns to rip a head off because the elasticity of the skin. Martin Sommer, Karl Otto Koch and Ilse Koch were all sadistic torturers at Buchenwald concentration camp. Supposedly, Sommer would hide his victims underneath his bed for the night until he could dispose of them. The Kochs and Sommer were put on trial by no other than Heinrich Himmler for their crimes. John C. Woods was the chief hangman for the Nuremberg trials. He botched numerous hanging as he wasn't a proper hangman. A lot of the hanging resulted in the victim having their head bashed against the opening and not having their neck snapped, instead swaying and struggling for air. Lobotomies were performed by sticking an ice pick through someone's eye socket, above the eyeball, and then tapping a hammer to drive it through the thin bone at the back of the socket and into the brain. The doctor would then swing the pick around, basically scrambling the brain, and then remove the pick. They claimed this cured mental illness by calming people down, but really all it did was cure mental illness by making people unable to make decisions at all, or basically making them severely brain damaged to the point they couldn't even care for themselves anymore or have complete thoughts. The last lobotomy was performed in 1967. Ducks are rapists. King Leopold was responsible for the killings of over 15 million Africans. Owls and crows hate each other. It's in their DNA. Gang wars. If you stab a man in the dead of winter, steam will rise from the wound. The Indians believed that this was the man's soul escaping his body. If you vomit within 1 hour of being exposed to a large dose of radiation, your mortality rate is 100%. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.